Well, hello and welcome to another video. My name is Charles Richard, and as you guys know, we've been working with the Nikon F. And my last video that I did, I actually brought you some photos that was taken with the Micro Nikkor, the 55 2.8, which is I think it's probably the best lens that Nikon has made in this F mount series of lenses, and that's of course it's just my opinion. And I've tested just about every lens that is out there in the market, and this is one lens that is a favorite not only for me but for just about everybody. And it's very flexible. It's not only can be used for a regular photography, but it's also an excellent macro lens. And with that said, like I mentioned, I do have a second part of the video, which is more dedicated to macro. And the only reason why I have not made that video, which is supposed to be this video, right, is because I'm just waiting for the photos to come back from the lab. All right. And so as soon as I get those photos, the next video, okay, which is what I'm waiting for, will have the photos, and that way I can complete the video and show you the macro photography that was able to be captured with this fabulous and fantastic lens. But today I want to talk to you about something else. I want to talk to you about how the world in photography is actually changing, and it's changing because now what seems to be the trend is older cameras that do film. It is no longer a trend of getting the latest and the greatest unless you're doing commercial work, right? But if you're actually doing stuff for yourself or stuff as a hobby, or stuff of that nature, right? The vintage cameras are what is right now in demand and in popularity, right? And even more so, film. Why film? Well, I think that it takes a long time for people to understand, right, that film in actuality cannot be, doesn't matter how good your digital counterpart is, it can never imitate the quality, the smoothness, the true, and I want to emphasize is the true cinematic look that can only be brought through film. Right? Digital does not bring that cinematic look. It brings a look, yes, but it does not bring that character, that smoothness, that richness in color that can only be achieved when you actually use film stock, whether it is made by Kodak or whether it's made by Fujifilm, whether it's made for photography or whether it is made for the big screen. The only thing that can bring that richness in color is true film. Well, what I've noticed is that a lot of guys and a lot of people that are trying to imitate this are actually making a very big mistake. And I want to talk to you about that because I think it is important to understand something that is as basic as this. And I want to show you just a couple of things, right, so that it can help you hopefully, become a better photographer using these techniques that was used in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, right? So that you can bring something that is authentic and not an imitation. There's two different things. One is to be authentic, and one is to try to imitate something that was done that is never going to be the real thing because you're imitating. It's still an imitation, regardless of whether it is digital or how good it is, or whether it is, something that is done, what we call post after you've taken the photo. It is still something that is manipulated and that is not true into its core value of how it was done back in the 50s and 60s. So what I've been using, as you guys know, I've been using my Nikon. Okay, this is my Nikon F, right? But what I wanted to show you is a couple of little things, right, that that I think is going to help you discover and maybe challenge you also to do things in a different way. All right, let me explain to you. Film, for example, this particular camera that was actually came out in 1959 is a camera that when it came out, in 1959, even through all the way through the 70s, right? There was no such thing as Photoshop. There was no such thing as even as a computer. All right, computers didn't exist back then. There was no such thing as Lightroom. So the way that we used to acquire certain colors, certain effects, certain things, right, that we wanted to bring into our final product was through three things, right? The first one is obviously, the camera played an important role, right? And this one, in this case, it's the Nikon F, which was made the big change from the rangefinder into what we call the SLR, right? This camera came in 1959, came out in 1959. Now, with that said, all right, the quality of what I get, okay, has to do a lot back then, right? And even today, right, has to do a lot with the lens. The problem that is occurring right now in today's day and age is that although the lens does affect what is shot on a sensor, right? And a sensor as well, is still not film, number one. And number two, most individuals think that, okay, I shot it with this lens, but that's not really the look that I want. I will correct it and I will make the adjustments in post-production. Well, you couldn't do that back then. Back then, you had to have the right film stock. And that means that if you wanted something that was rich in color, you had to use maybe like a Kodak Portra, right? Or something that brought those richness in color. They also had to use the proper lens because not all lenses have the right colors. Okay, some lenses sort of give you a little bit of a green tint or a little bit more of a yellow tint. Maybe it flares out over here, or over there. Each lens has a different character, right? And then in addition, something that was being used a lot, okay, back then was what we call filters. Okay, this happens to be the Koken filter. All right, the Koken filter is square filters, that you would put right in front of your lens that would actually change the way the behavior of how the actual image was actually finalized, right? For example, this one here happens to be a yellow, right? This yellow was very popular and it still is very popular. And there's nothing else that can imitate this or can even reproduce this, right? Because what it does when you're shooting black and white, it actually accentuates the contrast. And if you're using it in color, right, it actually smooths the skin tones, the skin tonality. So each filter had its different properties. There are some that are ND filters. There's some that are, that are half what is called gradients, where maybe half of it is blue and the other half is not. Okay, and you would use that, and match it to your horizon so that your sky would become a little bit more blue, had a little bit more emphasis on the clouds, and and stuff like that. These things was what was being used back then, all right, in place of Photoshop and Lightroom. Now, okay, you get Photoshop and Lightroom that can imitate all these things that were used back then. But even though you can do all those imitations with Photoshop and Lightroom, it is never and it will never be the same because you're imitating. An imitation can never be the real thing. So what I'm trying to tell you is if you want to try to imitate or want to try, I shouldn't say imitate, if you want to try to get what was being done back then, all right, the only way that you're going to be able to get what was being done back then is to use the same exact tools that we were using back then in 59, 60, 70. So if we were using, for example, the Nikon F, which you see right here, right, with this particular lens, and I wanted to do a black and white with a little bit of accentuation with my contrast, I would put this yellow filter, which is, let me show you how it goes. It's pretty simple how it goes. It's not hard at all. It's just a square, it's like a square glass, and you had different qualities of glass, obviously, right? Because there were different brands that was doing this, but the most popular was Koken. And you would take this little screen that you see here, this little glass that you see here, right? And you would just slide it up in here into the frame, right? And you would slide it like this, and now you've got an actual filter. And by the way, on these frames, you could put 2 and 3 different type of filters to be able to give that effect that you wanted. This was the equivalent of Photoshop. This was the equivalent of Lightroom that came many years afterwards. But if you want to actually, replicate what was being done back then, there is no other way than to actually use all the tools that we used to use back then. Don't use Photoshop. Don't use Lightroom. Do it exactly how we used to do it, and that is the only way that you're going to be able to get a true authentic look if you're trying to go back into time and be able to get that real look and that real richness. There is no other way to do it but to use what was being used back in those decades or those years, way back in history, when Photoshop didn't exist, and obviously Lightroom and all these other photo editing software and even computers didn't exist back then. This is what was being done. Your film stock, your lens, your filters in front, that's all we had. All right, that was what was being used back then. Anyways, if you have any questions, this is Charles Richard. If you haven't subscribed, please hit that button so that way and you can learn a little bit more. I am enjoying this camera very much. I'm getting this ready to go shoot some black and white, and so you can see the differences of the different filters and different things that was being used back then, in hopes that you can learn something and you might be able to maybe learn exactly how I used to do it 40 years ago. Because yes, I am that old. I am much more older than 40, and this is how I used to shoot my film when I first started. Anyways, I hope you guys are doing great, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye bye.